Morning, everybody. It's the obviously the 17th of September and Countryside Rights of Way panel. Could I say, first of all, thank you for all attending, and we'll press on with apologies, please.
Yeah, good morning, Chairman. We've not received any apologies this morning.
Excellent. We have in attendance Paul Snape, Jack Abrahams, myself, and David Smith, who's the Vice Chairman. But there's no apologies from other members. Okay, thank you. Right. Have we got any declarations of interest onto this agenda?
Not to my knowledge.
No. Okay, thank you. And we've got the minutes on the agenda in front of us of the meeting of the 16th of July. Moved. Can I have a seconder? Second. Moved and seconded. Thank you, and I'll sign those off after the meeting. Thank you very much. And we'll move swiftly on to item number 4, which is an application for an alleged bridleway between Oldcote Farm and Oldcote Drive to Coldclough Lane, Kidsgrove Bank. Which officer is going to take that? Okay, thank you. Sam?
Okay, thank you, Chair, members. Firstly, can I just explain to panel that this route comprises of
Sam, could you speak into your microphone a bit closer?
Right, okay.
That's better.
This route comprises of non-definitive routes and definitive routes. And so parts A to B, C to F, C to D, G to H and I to J on the plan are not at this present time on the definitive map, and the application is to add these parts as a bridleway. And parts B to C, F to G and H to I are currently recorded as footpath 172 and footpath 173, and so the application is to upgrade these parts to a bridleway. Also, part D to E of the alleged route falls within the boundary of Stoke-on-Trent, and so the City Council, being a unitary authority, produces the definitive map for the Stoke-on-Trent area. The plan reflecting the said parts can be located at Appendix A. Okay, moving on to the report. This application was originally made by Mrs. Pat Amies on behalf of Border Bridleways. Since the making of the application, Mrs. Amies has stood down and Miss Andrea Bosson has taken the role of the applicant. In support of the application, the original documents comprised of 11 user evidence forms. These can be located at Appendix C. After examination of the user forms, there does not appear to be any challenge to the actual usage of the route by any person, nor have there been any physical impediments. In the absence of any other major or identifiable challenge to the public's use of the claim route, the date of the application is the 14th of June 1995, and this date will be used as the challenge date. Accordingly, the requisite 20-year period of use should be calculated retrospectively from that date. So the period of use would fall between 1975 and 1995. This 20-year period is where most users provide evidence of use. A summary of the salient points from the user evidence forms can be located at Appendix C. Further examination of the forms indicates that 8 of the 11 users use the alleged route for 20 years plus and fall within the 20-year period. When asked, has the route always been on the same line, all 11 users claimed the route is different from what they originally used. 5 of the 11 users stated it used to run where the golf course is now, which is situated south of Oldcote Farm. A further 4 users state that the route changed when the open cast mining took place and the route was moved to the disused railway line. Moving on to the landowners, since the application has been made, officers discovered the land in which the alleged route crosses is solely now in the ownership of Newcastle-under-Lyme Borough Council. They object to the application as the route falls on a disused railway track and they were intending to develop the site for safe pedestrian routes. All the prescribed statutory consultees were contacted and invited to comment or submit evidence either in support or against the application. The Town Council of Kidsgrove objects to the application as they consider it to be a footpath and not a bridleway. During the investigation, officers discovered a small section of the route is a disused railway. It is understood that the railway was operational until approximately 1973. Also, officers researched the open cast mining within the area and discovered that Birch and Wood Colliery was in existence from the 1890s and closed in 1932, but coke and other byproduct production continued by using coal from other collieries. However, this production also ceased in 1973. On the 29th of September 2020, a draft report was circulated to all the relevant parties. It recommended that the order should not be made. From this, officers received comments from the applicants regarding the route is incorrect and incomplete. Officers discussed this issue with the applicant and there appears to have been an administrative error with previous officers which confused the application route. The correct route was established and officers proceeded to rewrite the report. Going back to other comments which were also made regarding the first draft report, the applicant disagreed with the recommendation and stated that Olcott Drive is a Staffordshire publicly maintainable highway and any obstruction of it or access to the application route adjoining it, which was and still is recorded as a public path, would have been an unlawful obstruction, and that users were legally entitled to deviate around. We are advised that this is the reason for deviations from the application route, resulting from periods of unlawful obstruction of the route in this area. Officers responded to the applicant regarding the disused railway line, stating without evidence of the disused railway line tracks being removed, it would not be possible for the route to be rode with a horse. The applicant returned with comments stating our research reveals that the correct and accurate situation is as follows. The loop line was fully closed to rail traffic in 1964. In 1971, a short section was reopened for the haulage of coal between a bunker at Park Farm Open Cast Workings, which is south of Staffordshire County Council boundary, and Stoke-on-Trent, to the coking kilns at the former Birch and Wood Colliery. This was short-lived and ceased in 1973. However, these movements of coal were not wholly over the loop line. There were a multitude of shunting lines connecting to the loop line around the area of Staffordshire Stoke-on-Trent boundary. The location of the kilns required trains and loads to pass off the loop line onto these separate shunting lines. There was, at the time, continuing equestrian access over the application route. As we explained, we use along the edge of the line rather than over the track bed along the section of the loop line. Is in the Stoke-on-Trent authority area for which a bridleway order is going to be published. The applicant claims that Jane Ridley of the North Staffordshire Bridleways Association knows the route well, and she used to ride this route also on group riding events. Jane Ridley completed a user evidence form in support of the application. She stated she has known the claimed route for approximately 30 years. She claims to have ridden the route from 1990 to present. She also states she organises group horse rides over the route. From the map Miss Ridley has highlighted the route in yellow, this appears that the route taken was from A to B to C and C to D. On the 16th of July 2021, the rewritten report was circulated to all the relevant parties. Newcastle Under-Lyme Borough Council responded they will send a response regarding the matter shortly. However, they have yet to respond. To conclude, in light of the evidence as set out, it is officers' opinion that the evidence does show that a public right-of-way with the status of a bridleway subsists, and so that the County Council should make a modification order to add parts A to B, C to F, C to D, G to H and I to J of the route as a bridleway and upgrade parts B to C, F to G and H to I from a footpath to a bridleway on the definitive map and statement of public rights of way.
Thank you, Sam. Members, any questions, thoughts on this report? David?
Yes, Chairman. Could I just check something that you said in the very early part of your report, which I didn't properly hear, where you were saying that Newcastle objected on the grounds that they were looking to develop part of this site. I mean, surely there's no way they can develop across a public footpath without a diversion order, or have I misunderstood the point you were making?
This proposal that they were making was back when the original application was made, back in 1995. Regards of their proposal at the moment, it's unclear with Newcastle Borough Council as they've yet to fully respond of what their plans or proposals or what they've actually done with the land at the moment.
If we are to make the order to seems to be a sensible thing for us to do, they would have to come back to us at some stage with a diversion request or something to be able to meet their requirements. But that's not a material fact as far as we're concerned today.
No, it's not. They will have the opportunity, once the order is made, whether they want to object to that order, and then they will perhaps make plans of what they want to do with the land, and then it'll be a part of them just negotiating what they want. So, okay.
Can I first publicly welcome Mike Murphy back to our meeting after a period of illness? It's great to have you back, Mike.
Thank you.
To go along with what David said, really, it's been 26 years since 1995, and nobody's made any challenges to it at all. And as David says, if they want to come back to us in later and make a diversion, no objection at all. So, I mean, if David's going to propose it, I'll gladly second it. I mean, going along with item 65, 66, the evidence is there that we should update it really from a footpath to a bridleway and then add it to a definitive map. So if David does propose, I'll gladly second it.
Thank you for that. Could I just, and I picked up this point about development, and I think it actually said developing the route as a pedestrian way rather than a housing estate or anything like that. I personally, as chair of this panel, I'm quite dismayed at the fact that Newcastle Borough Council haven't come back with any information. Am I correct on that?
Yes, I've been in contact with them for the duration of investigating this application, just to gain knowledge also of when or the tracks were actually removed, so we can actually establish when, whether that meets in the 20-year period that the users did say that they used the route. But unfortunately, they didn't return anything, so we've just had to proceed on the fact that we don't know when these tracks were removed.
So the Newcastle Borough Council, correct me if I'm wrong, have said that they'd like this to be a pedestrian route, not a bridleway, but they haven't come back to us with any supporting information. Now, I find that quite disappointing, and I think it'd be quite useful to have a letter, and I don't know what the committee think of this, a letter from me to the leader of Stafford, of Newcastle Borough Council, saying that, because it makes our job as county infinitely more difficult if we're chasing information which partners should really be sort of providing us with. It's not a big thing. So just what does the committee think about that?
Chairman, I would like to feel that we took some legal advice on that before we did that, in case we compromise our position as a panel. I mean, I think we should make a clear and precise decision today, and if Newcastle have failed to respond, then that's Newcastle's loss. If I start to get little concerns that we might compromise ourselves. I don't know. I would take advice to the panel.
Well, we've got the gentleman next to us who can give us an answer on that.
Thank you, Chair. This is obviously separate from the decision that the panel's making on the report. There is nothing to stop the panel writing to its partner councils, whether they be parish or district, just to highlight the fact that they are consulted on these applications, and it would assist the panel in their deliberations if they responded to that consultation. We will have more consultations going out, reports going out to Newcastle and everywhere else, actually. And quite often we do not get responses. Some of the district councils actually send the report that we send them to the local ward member for him to comment or her to comment. But others, quite often we don't hear nothing.
Chairman, I'd be happy, providing it doesn't give an indication to Newcastle that with us having made the decision that they can come back retrospectively and put in an opinion, but clearly they can't, and I wouldn't want to give them the impression that they could.
If the committee is so minded, can I suggest that we draft a letter and just run it through the members before we send it? Paul?
Can I also suggest that perhaps on the members' bulletin we highlight this again, that to members that if they receive notification that they come back to the officers either one way or the other, that they're in favour or not in favour of it, or they have no views either way. Just really because it just help everybody if we know where things are going.
Yeah, thank you. That's one for Zach to pick up, really. Can I, before we go to the vote, local member, following on what from Paul's just said, is Jill Burnett. Has she come back at all?
No, I've not had no response.
So we've got a proposal on the table to accept this report. I'm happy with it. Yeah. Okay, unanimous. So we'll move on to item number 5. Thank you, Sam. Right, number 5 is application for the addition of an alleged public footpath between Smallwood Manor and Buttermilk Hill Gate, Marchington. Local member is Philip Atkins. Philip Atkins has spoke to me and said that as with other applications, he's concerned that some of them are quite historical, but that was the only thing he said to me.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, this application was made by Martin Ray, and in support of this application, he submitted evidence of a first enclosure award dated 1805, an enclosure award dated 1811, and a highways order dated 1826. The route as a whole is shown on Appendix B, and it's marked from points A to point F. Parts B to C and parts D to E of this claimed route already have the status of public footpath, and therefore these sections do not need to be determined. Determining the remaining sections would connect the route as a whole. The applicant identified Mr. Wilfred Davis as one of the landowners. Mr Davis at the time stated that he did not consider the route to be public, there were no signs or obstructions in place, and he concludes that in the many years that he's lived at his property, 20 acres, he has never known any person to have used the footpath. A further landowner was identified by the applicant as a Mr Nobbs. He also stated that he did not consider the route to be public, and there are no signs or obstructions in place hindering the use of the route. There were a further 5 landowners identified at the time of the application who have not to date responded to the application. Marchington Parish Council were consulted, and they have responded that they are of the opinion that the footpath should be reinstated. However, the map shows the footpath running through a private garden, and therefore they believe that this should be avoided and advise the footpath should run alongside the property towards Tinker's Lane. If I can just refer you back to Appendix B, which shows the alleged route and the existing routes. So the alleged route runs at the, starts at the southern edge of Smallwood Manor and runs in a southerly direction until it reaches 20 acres and Hodge Lane. The route then continues past Hodge Lane and follows the same line as public footpath 30. However, the alleged route then continues in a southerly direction and connects with footpath 36. It instead there turns east and connects with Tinker's Lane as footpath 30 does. The route then continues south again until it reaches the northern tip of Marchington Woods and continues in a westerly direction until it reaches Buttermilk Hill Gate, and that is now known as public footpath 46. The route has been separated into sections just for ease and to reflect the parts of the route that have been already existing footpaths, and those sections will be explained later. So moving on to the evidence, firstly the enclosure awards. When considering an enclosure award, the wording, powers and the context all have to be taken into consideration to determine its evidential value. In relation to the 1805 and the 1811 enclosure awards, only extracts have been provided along with the relevant maps, but neither provide the full text of the award. In order for the commissioners at the time to be able to create and stop up routes, there would need to be clear authority provided in the Enabling Act. There is nothing to indicate that in this case the commissioners did not have the necessary powers to create or stop up routes, as there's no evidence of any other legal events such as quarter session orders. However, without the full text of the award, this is not conclusive. In relation to the 1805 enclosure award, footway A forms part of the alleged route, which is marked C to D, D to E, and then E to F. The award makes reference to a public footway connecting to a present footway of footway A. Although there's nothing to indicate from either of the map or the award whether footway A has public or private rights, the fact that this public footway is connecting, it would suggest it has, the fact that it is connecting to a public footway suggests that it has public rights over it, as it's unlikely that the commissioners would have connected a public way to a private way. Therefore, it can be reasonably alleged that the route marked C to D and E to F is a public footpath. And just to reiterate again, D to E is already a public footpath 30. In relation to the 1811 enclosure award, this relates to the northern part of the route, which is marked A to B. Whilst the map shows and supports the existence of the route as a footpath, there is nothing to indicate that either the map or the award as to whether it is a public or private status, and therefore it cannot be determined with any certainty that this northern section marked A to B is in fact a public footpath. With regards to the highway order from 1826, this does not provide any supporting evidence for the existence of the alleged route or the nature of any rights over it. The map is very similar to the 1811 enclosure award in that it shows Long Chimney Lane. The order and notice do not refer to the alleged route, and the map does not show the alleged route. This may be because the route no longer existed by 1826 and it was not deemed relevant to the order and therefore it was not included. Following circulation of the report, comments were received from a Mr. D.W.T. Davis on behalf of his late father, Mr. Wilfred Davis, of 20 acres. Mr. Davis states that his mother, Mrs. Davis, has lived at 20 acres for 80 years and she's never been aware of a footpath through their farmyard. No one has ever attempted to walk through the farmyard or has asked to do so. Mr. Davis further states that people have walked along the old Burton Road. He refers to a footpath that comes out approximately 20 yards below the farmyard entrance and continues down the road approximately 97 yards along Smallwood Manor Drive. Also, the Old Burton Road that leads to Uttoxeter. Mr Davis then goes on to state that the original Smallwood Manor was built below the church before the church even existed. It is assumed that he is referring to St John's Church. The manor was moved closer to the now existing Smallwood Manor site, which was known as Long Chimneys. It was then demolished and a new Smallwood Manor was built over the Old Burton Road. This could be accessed from the Marchington Main Road, which presumably is the B5017. The documentation already referred to in the report, and in particular the enclosure ward dated 1811 and the the notice of stopping up, dated 1826, have already shown that Long Chimney Lane Highway was extinguished. There is no evidence as to what happened to the footpath that ran alongside Long Chimney Lane, but as already established, there's nothing to confirm that the footpath was in fact a public footpath, and therefore the recommendation for the northern part of this route, marked A to B, is that no public footpath should be included on the definitive map. And therefore this does not, the comments from the Davis doesn't affect the rest of the application. It's also noted in Mr Davis's response that Tinkers Lane was a main junction and there is a footpath which takes members of the public from the moat to Tinkers Lane, which comes out below 20 acres. It is assumed that Mr Davis is referring to footpath 30. Mr Davis concludes that his family objects to the addition of the footpath through their farmyard, as they consider it would be an invasion of both privacy and security. A copy of the correspondence is attached to Appendix I. Factors relating to privacy and security cannot be, as a matter of law, taken into consideration when determining whether this claimed route should be added to the definitive map. Members must confine themselves to the evidence relating to the existence or not of the alleged footpath. In addition to the comments from Mr Davis, comments were also received from the local member, Councillor Atkins. Councillor Atkins advised that he concurs with the recommendation and agrees that there's no public right-of-way over this section. He further advised that Smallwood Manor was built in 1886 as a residence before becoming a school in the 1920s. He also confirmed that he attended Smallwood Manor as a pupil, and during his time there, he never saw anyone using the alleged path. Marchington Parish Council have also responded advising that they fully agree and support the conclusion in the recommended option. So therefore, to conclude, when reviewing the evidence in relation to section A and B of the alleged route, whilst there is evidence of the existence of footpaths shown on the 1811 enclosure award, there is no evidence that this footway had public rights, and therefore it is not said to have passed the test of the balance of probabilities. In relation to sections C to D and E to F, again, there is evidence of a physical existence of a footpath along the route, shown on the 1805 enclosure award, but neither the map nor the award confirm that the footpath is public. When the lesser test is considered, and that of reasonable allegation, this is also not satisfied in relation to section A to B. In relation to sections C to D and E to F, the evidence provided supports the existence of a footpath along this route, although it doesn't clarify the nature of the rights. The award confirms that the route connects a public footway, and therefore it can be reasonably alleged that the footpath is public, and it is unlikely that a public way would be connected to a way that had different rights. So taking everything into consideration, it's apparent that the evidence does not show a public right-of-way with the status of footpath over the section A to B. However, it can be reasonably alleged that the public right-of-way with the status of footpath, which is not shown on the map and statement, does subsist between points C to D and E to F on the map.
Thank you very much for that report. Can I just read out the recommended option because it sort of threw me for a start, and it's to not make an order adding to the public footpath on the line A to B on the map attached to Appendix B, full stop, to make an order adding to the public footpath on the lines marked C to D and E to F on the map attached at Appendix B, the definitive map and statement. That's correct, and I think the bit that threw me was the first bit, was to not. So as long as members have picked that up, that's important. Any comments? David?
Thank you, Chairman. Just so we're absolutely clear on the bits that are in and the bits that aren't in, there were 2 points that I picked up on. One was actually 3. One was that the footpath would go through someone's garden. Is that part of the footpath we're not... perhaps I'll give you my 3 items and then you can deal with all of them.
Yeah, give me all of your items. I need to have a look at that.
Okay, fine. The second one was where it goes through the farmyard. I mean, presumably, if that's part of what we're making an order on today, there would be every opportunity for them to be able to apply for a redirection of the footpath at some stage. And the other thing was that failure to have signs indicating the existence of a footpath, which you mentioned earlier on, was in someone's objections to the route, in my opinion, doesn't indicate that a footpath doesn't exist. You know, someone at some stage, either they were never put up or they've been taken down. If there's no sign saying that a footpath exists, it's extremely unlikely that people will actually use a footpath that there's no signage saying it exists. So I don't see that that's any relevant evidence at all. Thank you.
Okay, so in relation to the going through the farmyard, that's in relation to the route that is A to B on the plan. So that's been, we're not adding that section as a route anyway. Yeah. In relation to the part that goes through the garden, you'll have to just give me a moment so I can have a look to see which section specifically that is.
It was in the very early part of your report.
Bear with me. Can I just come back on that point, if you just give me a second just to flick through. But in relation to the signage on the route, this is obviously based on historical evidence. So there may and may not have been signage up, but that isn't a consideration that you need to be concerned with, whether there were signs or not. It's based on historical evidence, so it's possible that there wouldn't have ever been any signs up because it's not on the definitive map. So, okay, if you just give me a second.
Can I just bring in Mick on this one?
Yeah. Whilst Claire can't... Sorry. While Claire can't find immediately where Marchington Parish Council are talking about it going through a garden, to be perfectly blunt, it's immaterial. If the award shows the route as a public highway, and in the interim, after the award was made, somebody's built a house and they've got a garden, technically, that's become an obstruction. Not something that we would look to enforce probably, because the owners would have done so unknowingly. If they'd done so knowingly, that would be a different matter. But in respect of your decision today, whether it runs through the garden or not is to an extent immaterial. You need to make the decision based upon whether or not the award stipulates that it's a public highway, and as Claire has put, the recommendation is that it's reasonably alleged to exist. If it does go through somebody's property, as you alluded to when we were talking about the farmyard, you could actually say that it's up to that owner to take steps once the order is made and confirmed to deal with that issue and that situation. But it's one of those irrelevant considerations that to the panel really, it's in there, you can take note of it, but it's not something that can influence your decision. The fact that it goes through somebody's property.
Paul?
Can I thank Claire for the report? And I go along with really a lot of what David says. But just a little bit, is it enclosure or is it enclosure acts with an E?
With an I.
Is it?
Enclosure. Because
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes, it is enclosure.
I just thought it was enclosure in the acts, no?
Is this for field boundaries?
It's all before my time.
Yeah. Well, Philip Atkins was probably there at the time, so he'll know. But it is enclosure.
EN.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was only going to add to my comments. I don't wish to complicate matters, but if it's not part of the section which we're actually going to approve, then the whole thing goes away and we forget about it and stop wasting time. As a local member, I feel uncomfortable of what the public's feelings would be that we've sat here today and approved something going through, quite legally, through somebody's garden. And I felt that we perhaps ought to be doing a little bit more work before we actually approve the application. I'm open to your thoughts, Chairman.
Paul?
Well, I like David's comments. I just feel Mike has passed the definitive comment, really, saying that whether it goes to somebody's garden or not, it makes no difference to the definitive acts, and also stated cases going back for many, many years. So really, if we do make the order, we write to them and just say that there is a route of redress where they can make a redirection order. But really, I don't really feel it's a reason to stop making the order today.
Yes, the owners would be able to make a diversion order, but the owners of all the land along the route will be notified, and they'll receive a copy of the order. I mean, it comes in an envelope that's marked "This affects your property," so that they don't put it straight in the bin, and they're given the opportunity to object. And it goes to the planning inspector, as members well know. However, it is also open to them to divert it. The unfortunate thing is, with a lot of historical applications, properties have been built in the intervening years. I mean, we're talking 200 years. Properties have been built, and in some instances, they're over the highway. However, the law of the land is, once a highway, always a highway, in the absence of legislation or a stopping up order. That's absolute. That's reaffirmed time and time again by the courts, the Supreme Court and everywhere else. So to some extent, whilst you may have sympathy with the landowner, there isn't a lot of choice if you find that the documentation is valid and that it holds a legal standing. Any implications that arise from that, from it becoming a public highway, have to be dealt with at a later stage. but they can't be taken into consideration. It would be an irrelevant consideration to say that, well, we don't like this because it goes through somebody's property. It's not something that you can take into account.
So we've had a definitive statement there from Mick. I noticed the local member didn't actually bring this subject up either. So I feel quite that it's in order that we vote on the recommendation in front of us. Could I have a proposal and a seconder? Paul proposes it and David Smith seconds it. All in favour? Right. There's 3 in favour. Are you? I was going to abstain to finish that. Okay, thank you. So that's passed. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to item number 6, which is the application for alleged public footpath between Western Road and Knight Avenue, Stafford. Who's taking this one? Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the panel. First of all, I should say that we've received no representations or objections from the local member. This is an interesting application from the applicant, Mr. Martin Ray, made in 1996. It's an application for the addition of a public footpath between Western Road and Knight Avenue, Stafford. I should say straight away that the evidence, your officers feel the evidence is sufficient to show that a public footpath can be reasonably alleged to subsist along the route marked A to B on the plan at Appendix B in the pack. An outline of the case. This application is based on user evidence. There were 16 user evidence forms, 13 initially and 3 more followed shortly after in support of the application. 2 landowners were identified, being Stafford District General Hospital and Westbury Homes Holdings Limited. During the consultation process, it was discovered that Westbury Homes is now part of the Persimmon Homes Group, and they, of course, were duly consulted as well. Taking the user evidence forms together, it became apparent that the relevant 20-year period for this application would be from 1976 to 1996. There was no challenge to use, and so this relevant period was calculated back from the date of the application. Of the 16 users who supplied evidence forms, a total of 8 had used the route throughout the relevant 20-year period. 7 of these had done so on a very regular basis, be it daily.
Should we hold now until the chair comes back in? So,
well, I suppose that's up to the members of the panel, but the chairman's gone to make a phone call, and it's obviously something he's got to do.
just as a legality, as is on the evidence.
Can I make it clear that I'm taking over as chairman for this item?
Okay, thank you. To continue, 7 of these had done so on a very, very regular basis, be it daily, weekly, or once or twice a day. None of the remaining 8 users had used the route right up until 1996, so it was not possible to combine these as there was insufficient overlap. However, exactly 1/2 or 50% of the total number of users had used the route throughout, and all but 1 of these on a very frequent basis. Of the relevant 8 users, 7 had stated the route was 6 feet wide, and the remaining users attested to a similar figure in either imperial or metric. It sometimes gets quite confusing when we have sort of different gauges of width, so we have to get quite apt at working these calculations out. 7 out of 8 of those users who used the route during the relevant period did so on foot. The remaining user didn't indicate how he'd used the route, although in all probability it too was on foot. One user, Doris Disbray, stated that many people had used the path and referred to parents taking children to and from school. If children were accessing the route to and from school, then this again reinforces that in all probability it was used regularly. It is also less likely that numbers of children using the route would have escaped the notice of the landowner, particularly as it was an adjacent landowner. A Mr. Ivan Dodd stated that he'd used the path since the 1950s and indicated the route was shown on the 1901 OS map as a track through woods to Western Road. A copy was not supplied, and even if it had been, it would have been limited in legal value, showing only a physical feature on the ground. Catherine Ray at point 48 in the report referred to the path being constantly used for walking dogs and taking children to school. This excess use by children would have been conspicuous, and it would be hard to see how it escaped the notice of the adjacent landowner. Turning to the landowner response forms, it can be seen that the hospital had owned the land for the past 48 years. This was as of 1996. There did appear to be signage on the route stating private, but on examination these were found to be insufficient to be fatal to the claim. They simply bore the word private, were faded and in places missing. There was no wording that would implicitly state that the landowner had no intention to dedicate. These were later replaced by the landowner with slightly more informative signs, but again these were still insufficiently detailed. There is a plan showing where these signs were in the hospital's submission, and that's given in the appendices. The hospital, as primary, that's the largest and earliest landowner, also stated they had never given anyone permission to use the route, never challenged anyone or turned anyone back, and never installed any obstructions like gates and stiles on the route. Jumping to points 70 and 71 in the report, it does appear that Stafford Hospital deposited a statement and plan with Staffordshire County Council. These can defeat a claim, although this one was adequate, but critically it was lodged with us in 1997, a year after the claim, and therefore would only be relevant to any period after that date, not the 20-year period in question. That is the relevant period. There were several routes indicated on this plan, and Route E appeared to be the most consistent with the route in question. The secondary landowner, going back to point 66 in the report, was Westbury Homes, and they stated in their response from that form that they had owned parts of the land in question for 2.5 years, the time of a nearby development. There was some indication that they had considered laying out certain routes in this area, although none had gone to fruition. Again, they had never given any permissions, challenged anyone, or installed any obstructions like fences or gates. Their ownership was confined to a short section at the end of the route. Taking all the evidence together, we have, on the one side, good user evidence that states the route has been used without secrecy, force, or permission throughout the relevant 20-year period. On the other side, we have the landowner responses and actions that suggest there was an intention to dedicate the route to public use, and that this use was accepted by the public as of right. Okay, there was a deposited plan and a statement made by the hospital, but it was lodged too late, dating from 1997, a year after the application, and the signage that was there was insufficient to be fatal to the claim. Following the circulation of the draft report, I can confirm that one of the landowners, Persimmon Homes, that's the successor to Westbury Homes, has no objection. I've been in telephone conversations and written discussions with the second landowner, Stafford Hospital, who were going to forward a response, but to date nothing has been received. I should add that this report was deferred from the last panel meeting to enable both landowners additional time to access and assess the evidence. I should also add that both landowners in this case have been very respectful of the Section 53 application process, both having inherited this from what were essentially different organisations, and this is appreciated. The hospital has changed trusts, and the developer has been succeeded by another developer. The question of whether there was an implied permission for the public to use the route was also considered following the circulation of the report. The hospital, of course, being a place where the public are allowed to go. The 2015 Village Green case, Goodman versus the Secretary of State for the Environment, gives some guidance on this. In the 2015 case, it was ultimately held that simply managing and owning land for a particular use was not enough to demonstrate an implied appropriation. Therefore, as in the hospital's case, they're simply managing the land or owning the land without taking specific steps to appropriate it for use as a pleasure walk or a school run, means it could not be implied that this was its intended use. There is a statutory criteria for appropriation set out in Section 122(2)A of the Local Government Act 1972, appropriation of land including open spaces, which gives guidance on this. The hospital lodging the deposited plan and statement in 1997 would appear to support the fact that the route had not previously been appropriated for use as a pleasure walk or school run, the primary uses of the route evidenced in the statements. As such, there can be no implied permission to use the route as the hospital simply owned or managed the land without appropriating it for use as a pleasure walk or a school run. If they had designated it as a pleasure walk or school run, then its use would have been by right, and it would of course have been fatal to the claim. As such, all points seem to be satisfied on the evidence provided, and in this case it is your officer's opinion that the evidence does show that a right-of-way is reasonably alleged to subsist along the route on the plan marked A to B. It is further recommended that this should be made to a width of 1.8 metres, as it was consistently evidenced as being 6 foot wide throughout the user's submissions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and happy to take any questions.
You've heard the evidence from the officers. Do we have any comment? Paul.
I think an excellent report, the first thing I'd like to say, as they all have been today. When you bring the stated case in, we had that in our train sessions on various occasions, and their application for various things is after the date. We've got all the user evidence, we've got everything else involved, so I'll go along with officer's recommendation on this one.
Because I had to go out on an emergency phone call, I'll defer back to you, David, as chair on this one, this item.
Those in favour? Thank you. That's approved.
Thank you, committee members. Having a vice chairman is fairly important occasionally, so thank you, David, for taking that item. We'll move now on to item number 7, which is adoption of policy for dealing with Section 53 reports to the panel. I presume you were taking this, Mick?
Yes, Chair, thank you. Keep forgetting. I think I'm loud enough. Yeah, it's okay. Members will be aware that we changed the criteria for dealing with applications a couple of years ago, where we decided that we would narrow the criteria for making a case for priority, but we also included the fact that directed applications would obviously take preference over applications that had already been lodged. In effect, they leapfrog to the top of the list. That's been the case now for a couple of years, but we have found that on occasion we have reports done, consulted on and finalised that have a date that is somewhat later than the date of applications which we've not been able to finalise yet. We have no mechanism to essentially take them out of date order in the sense of the date directed. What I'm bringing this to the panel for is to allow us to take those applications where they have been finalised, because they're either more straightforward, there have been no objections, no comments, etc., etc., that we can bring those to the panel and the panel can deliberate on them, rather than having to hold them back in abeyance and the panel perhaps not having enough business to deal with. We do have a number in the pipeline, and it will continue to be the situation that officers will work on the reports that have got the earliest deadline, but quite often they turn out to be the more complicated ones. Members will in the next couple of months have an application laid before them that is sitting there at the top of the list. Direction date is probably about 18 months old, but it's complicated, and it's taken a great deal of effort and to-ing and fro-ing to deal with it. Consequently, that's sitting there, and in a way it's forming a logjam that officers are reluctant to start bringing applications to the panel that are a later date in head of it for fear of being accused that we are actually delaying things. We don't delay things unless we have to. We deal with them as soon as and as expeditiously as possible. So we just want the panel's approval that if we do have applications that we've finalised, and yes, they are later deadlines set by the Secretary of State, that we can bring them to the panel without fear or penalty. We do intend to let the Secretary of State know that that was our intention, and that is what we're going to do.
This seems sensible to me, but David?
Yeah, Chairman, I've sat on this panel for some 8+ years, and during my time as chairman, I've been through the legal department. I've been in every direction we possibly can and worked with Mick to try and get this brought forward. And so I'm delighted to see the report today, and I would like to propose that we accept the report, Chairman.
Thank you, David. Paul?
I was vice chair of this panel for 4 years and agree with everything David said. We're quasi-judicial, so I'll use the expression, justice delayed is justice denied. So really people are waiting to have their views looked at, built a panel, so they can put through. So holding things back which are ready to go, I believe, is wrong. So I go 100% with David, really. If things are ready to come to panel, they should be brought to panel. But I agree that what Mike says, we write to the Secretary of State and say, we're taking this action for this reason, to help people out. Also, to get the numbers down. When people look at our numbers and say we've got so many waiting, if we can get even 5 off that list, it makes such a big difference, really.
Jack, this is important, and it's something that we as members have control over. Are you happy?
Yes, I've picked up on that, Chair, and I'm in agreement with everybody here.
Well, obviously I agree as well. It's important that we do push forwards on the workload, and to have a logjam with one really difficult application does seem not just a waste of taxpayers' money, but also, as Paul so eloquently put it, an injustice to the people concerned. I don't think we'll need to vote on it, or perhaps we ought to just show our hands because we all agree. Yeah, and we'll take that forwards. Thank you, Mick. We'll now move on to item number 8, which is adoption of policy for dealing with submissions made on Section 53 reports scheduled to be heard by the panel.
Thank you, Chair. Members will be aware that meetings get cancelled at the last minute, or officers come to the panel and we say to the panel, we've had to defer this report because we've had a late submission this morning and we haven't had time to evaluate it, etc., etc. That's happened many times. I mean, we had to cancel August's panel, even though I'd only been back 4 days and I cancelled the panel. Because of lack of business, because we'd had late comments. In a lot of instances, these comments are irrelevant. And we can quickly see that. But we haven't got time to do a proper evaluation, etc. So what we propose is to set a deadline in our letters saying this will be heard by, if we know the date that it's going to panel, this will be heard by the panel on such and such a date. We would like your response. If the panel is meeting on a Friday, we want your response by Tuesday. If we don't get it, it may not be considered. Because to some extent, some of it's a tactic. And that is especially true, I have to say, with some sorrow to an extent, where there are legal representatives involved. they tend to drop something on us at the very last minute. That doesn't deny them the right to have what they've put forward heard, because if the decision is to accept the application, they can always make that submission in objecting to the order. You can introduce fresh evidence. What I would say as a codicil is that if we find something that's come in and it's got what we consider to be material evidence, and we can see that straight away, then we would still defer it. But if we can see that it's just basically comments, etc., then we would like to continue, tell the panel that, and just work away. Because the delay often means that it's not a month, it's a couple of months, 3 months, dependent on schedule, what officers are able to produce, the responses that go backwards and forwards. And I have to admit that in the majority of cases, the comments or the material we receive is irrelevant. So we'd like the panel to endorse the fact that we will put a deadline in our correspondence that if you haven't responded by such and such a date, then it may not be considered by the panel. And that's our proposal.
Thank you, Mick. Again, these are measures that we need to put in place to ensure that we hear as many applications as is possible. And I do like Paul's comment about justice being served in as expedient a way as possible. Any comments on this? David?
Chairman, I'd be very happy to propose this, but could I just ask, if someone submits late evidence and it's not considered by the panel, who then hears that late evidence? Because it doesn't come back to us, does it?
The late evidence, if it is material, we can almost certainly tell at that point just by looking at it. If it's not heard by the panel, I mean, we're talking of a gap of 3 days. If it's not heard by the panel, then it can be submitted by an applicant when they appeal to the Secretary of State because you've refused to make the order, or it can be considered by the planning inspector at a public inquiry on objections. So it isn't that it won't be heard, it just won't be heard by the panel. It can be introduced at a later date. I have to say, though, if one considers it, if you've got the evidence, why haven't you submitted it? Why have you held it back to the last minute? Because it isn't the sort of thing that you can go out and discover, go out on Monday and discover it so as you could submit it on Thursday. It's something that you would have been aware of. So I think by setting a deadline, it's officers' opinion that by setting that deadline, we'll focus the attention of all the interested parties for them to make a comment. And make that comment in good time. David?
But let's just come back on that point. What's always concerned me is the age of a lot of our applications. And I just wonder whether some of these ones that we're going to be able to deal with more quickly, we're going to have a situation where the people are long dead that made the original objections. And I suppose being concerned that we do the right thing, are we able to make sure that their successors, I mean, I know quite often we see that we have the children of original objectors. I just wondered whether we were absolutely satisfied that by not fast tracking, that's the wrong description, but by bringing things forward and dealing with them more quickly, that evidence that had been presented some considerable time ago may not be relevant, or the person may not be alive?
We take into account everything that's been said or submitted to us at the time the application is made. So if a landowner who may have since passed away, or the landowner has changed, made a comment in, shall we say, for example, 1995, those comments are still relevant, because anything that's happened since 1995 is immaterial. The panel doesn't look at that, because the whole principle of Section 53 is that a route has come into existence at the date the application was made, or before the date the application was made. So any comments made by landowners at that point are still relevant and taken into account. Any evidence that they provide is still evaluated. New landowners, we do contact them, we do ask for their opinion. Quite often, people just ignore it for whatever reason, I've no idea. But they don't respond until, oh, you're going to hear a matter this week? We haven't had time to respond. I'm very sorry, but you have. The fact that you've sat on it and put it on your coffee table is just, you know, it's just one of those things. I'm sorry, but you should have responded. If they do have evidence, then they need to submit it. And we're hoping that this will focus people's minds as a definite date by which you've got to have the material in. It's not that we're denying people the opportunities to state their case, it's that we want them to state it in a timely fashion. And I think, as I say, I think that to some extent it's a tactic to delay matters further. It's a bit like the cheques lost in the post. But to use an analogy, but officers find it extremely frustrating when we have to defer something and then we come back the next month and we say to the panel, well, actually, there was no real need.
Yeah, we've had that once.
We've had that several times. There are occasions when, yes, we will still turn to the panel and say, it's your decision, but we think we need to defer this one because of. But we will have a reason for that.
Okay. Paul.
I think timelines in the legal business go with most things. I can imagine you go into a Crown Court one morning and say, Judge, I can't give evidence because I've got this new piece of... You'd have your head bitten off. So really, I go along with what Mike said, but I mean, checks in the post, I can give a better one. A colleague of mine went to court and said he couldn't give evidence because his dog had eaten his pocketbook. It made the page 3 of the Sun. Because, but no, I agree with exactly what you said, Mike. Some of these, I mean, they're not repeats. You couldn't really say they're malicious litigators, but occasionally we're going down that line where they are just trying to make it difficult for everybody to buy time, to hold it all back, when in some cases they've had 10 years to make those applications, as we know. So I go along with the officer's recommendation on this one.
So we've got a proposal, a seconder. Do you want to speak, Jack, or are you happy to? Yeah. So can we vote on it? Okay, thank you. Mick, did you want to make any further comments?
Yes, but perhaps I should have said that when we're looking at this, I mean, some of it's down to historical evidence. And what a new landowner has got to offer, really and truthfully, is probably immaterial, as is sometimes the existing landowner. It becomes more relevant when we're talking about user. But we have various guidelines in case law. For example, if it's contentious, we can use Taylor and betterment, or there are various things that we can refer to see where the contention lies and whether it's relevant, etc. So we do have guidelines that we can operate by.
Thank you. We now come to the part of the meeting which is exclusion of the public. Can I thank officers and members for the piece of meeting up till now that's been webcast. And I do appreciate the fact that a lot of time and effort is being put into dealing with applications and trying to find ways of speeding up applications. So at this point, I'll read that the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business, which involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in the paragraph of Part 1 of Schedule 12A, as amended, of the Local Government Act 1972 indicated below. And could we have the webcam off please?